Senator Al Franken of Minnesota on Capitol Hill in Washington in October. Tom Brenner, New York Times. Street. Paul, vile behavior, said one liberal activist. Absolutely wrong, said a lawyer who votes Democratic. More proof that he does not live up to Minnesota values, said a Republican woman who voted against him. As Minnesotans absorbed the news that their own Senator Al Franken, a Democrat, had become the latest public official to be accused of mistreating women, there was widespread condemnation of his behavior in his home state. On Thursday, Mr. Franken apologized for an incident in 2006 in which he was accused of groping and forcibly kissing Leanne Tweeden, a radio newscaster, during a USO tour in the Middle East before he was elected to the Senate. But many voters in Minnesota were not ready to demand Mr. Franken's resignation, even after aiming the same call at two state legislators accused of UAL harassment earlier this month. Some said they were trying to make sense of the details of the allegations in the context of Mr. Franken's record as a liberal leader who had been held up as an advocate for women's rights. Other questions lingered too. Would there be more claims, and where did the allegation against Mr. Franken fit into the flood of UAL harassment and assault allegations launched against an array of leaders in Hollywood, politics and business, in cafes and on Facebook pages? People here expressed outrage, and sometimes sorrow, that someone they saw as a progressive and a defender of women had behaved so offensively. They praised his record on women's rights, especially for Native American women, a major issue in Minnesota. They reasoned that the incident was a long time ago, when Mr. Franken was a comedian and not an elected official. If this is a one-off, I'm willing to give him some slack, said Barbara Kuepers, 72, a retired lawyer from Minneapolis. She also said she supported a Senate ethics hearing into Mr. Franken's behavior. Are other things going to come out? She continued. Many of us, both professional and non-professional women, have been subjected to unwanted touching, kissing and other boorish behavior by our male colleagues. It's time to end it. Others said they had seen this brand of behavior from Mr. Franken before. During his Senate campaign in 2008, Republicans pointed to a column he wrote for Playboy in 2000 called Pornorama that joked about visiting a laboratory, a sketch he proposed on Saturday Night Live in which the CBS journalist Leslie Stahl was drugged and raped, and comments at a human rights campaign dinner before he was in the Senate that included jokes about lesbians. I think Senator Franken has a track record and a history of inappropriate comments and actions, Jennifer Carnahan, chairwoman of the Minnesota Republican Party, said in an interview. I think that anyone that is willing to make jokes to that level puts females in positions where they feel uncomfortable and harassed. I don't see how you can be an advocate for women. Privately, some Democratic officials in Minnesota said they felt uneasy not calling for his resignation, worried that it would expose them to accusations of hypocrisy. This week, some national Democrats have publicly questioned the response at the time to Bill Clinton's UAL relationship with an intern while he was president, with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York now saying that Mr. Clinton should have resigned. But they also tried to draw a distinction between Mr. Franken's behavior, which they saw as isolated, and the pervasive, long-standing patterns of UAL harassment that other elected officials were accused of. One of Mr. Franken's close allies, Senator Amy Klobuchar, also a Minnesota Democrat, said that she strongly condemned his behavior and that the Senate Ethics Committee should investigate it, but she has not called for him to step down. The editorial board of the Star-Tribune in Minneapolis, which only days ago called for the resignations of the state legislators accused of UAL harassment, including unwanted advances and unsolicited text messages with UAL content, wrote Franken, so far, is accused of one incident that occurred before he took office. That does not excuse or mitigate the gravity of his conduct, which was despicable, but the story was still developing as this editorial was being written. On Friday, several women who had worked on Mr. Franken's staff released a statement in his defense. Many of us spent years working for Senator Franken in Minnesota and Washington, the statement said. In our time working for the senator, he treated us with the utmost respect. He valued our work and our opinions and was a champion for women both in the legislation he supported and in promoting women to leadership roles in our offices. A native of Minnesota, Mr. Franken ran for the Senate in 2008 after a career as an entertainer, liberal radio host and author of books with titles like Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Right. He is eligible to run for a third term in 2020. Minnesota is led by one of the most liberal governors in the country, Mark Dayton, who has repeatedly clashed with the Republican-controlled state legislature. Hillary Clinton won the state by a razor-thin margin in 2016. Mr. Dayton, who would appoint a replacement if Mr. Franken were to resign, said in a statement that he was shocked to hear these reports on Thursday. For his part, Mr. Franken apologized to Ms. Tweeden and said he would gladly cooperate with an ethics investigation. "I respect women," he said in a statement on Thursday. "I don't respect men who don't. And the fact that my own actions have given people a good reason to doubt that makes me feel ashamed." Matt Ferber reported from St. Paul and Julie Bosman from Chicago.